Kiati, I'm head of Joshi Advocates. Thank you very much for joining us in this video. In the next 5 minutes, we'll look at the Home Office policy on the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, why does the Home Office have a policy? Home Office has policies on every place on the planet that has human rights violations. Home Office caseworkers consider these policies when assessing if the person will face a risk of harm and assess the asylum claim. Even immigration law practitioners consider these policies, and as well as immigration law judges in the UK consider this policy. So the policy is objective evidence of what is happening to the Palestinian civilians in the occupied Palestinian territories. So we'll look at that now. So this is gov.uk, and we're in the policy occupied Palestinian territories, and there are two of them. You note here, it up here says last updated 31st of October 2023. However, when we come to the both policies, this one says March 2020. So we'll look at that to run. Okay, so this is the policy that the Home Office caseworkers, immigration lawyers and judges consider when assessing asylum. Why UK should grant protection? Is it because there is a risk of life because of humanitarian violations? Now, I want to look at this page here, which is page 9 of 150. I'll just take you through it. So it says here, the occupied Palestinian territories include the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, right? So first, the West Bank is split into 3 areas. Area A, governed by the Palestinian Authority. Area B, by the PA and Israel administration. And Area C, under Israeli control. Gaza is controlled by Hamas. And it says there is no Israeli presence in the territory. We'll come back to that. And East Jerusalem is governed by Israel. All right. Palestinian residents in Gaza and West Bank have permanent status in these territories, but cannot generally reside in East Jerusalem. A Palestinian registered in Gaza may visit, but cannot generally live in the West Bank. And then a Palestinian in East Jerusalem have permanent residence in Israel, though this must be periodically reviewed and may be revoked by the Israeli authorities. So let's look at the way Palestinian civilians live in the West Bank and Gaza. So it says Palestinians residents in the West Bank and Gaza have their personal details recorded on the population registry, a computerized database administered by the PA in Ramallah. But oversight ultimately is with the Israeli authorities, who give the 9-digit ID card. And then it goes on. Israel controls all entry and exit points in the West Bank, and all but one into Gaza, which is controlled by Egypt and Hamas. Israel also restricts the freedom of movement for Palestinians into, between, and within the protected Palestinian territories through the use of temporary and non-temporary checkpoints, as well as a system of entry and exit permits. So we'll see in a minute what it looks like, what kind of permits you have to have, and then you finally manage to get the permit, and then you also get to a checkpoint, and what happens. Let's continue. There are different type of permits depending on a reason to travel. The application process can be slow, and many are rejected. Sources considered that there are a number of human rights concerns in the West Bank, including land confiscation by Israeli settlers, restriction of movement, and arbitrary arrest and detention. There are also a number of socio-economic problems, including high levels of unemployment and inadequate health care, access to health care. Sources agree that the human rights, security, and humanitarian situations in Gaza are difficult and much worse than in West Bank. While there is no open conflict between Israel and Hamas, this is 2020, of course. Even then, though, the Great March of Return protests in 2018 along the fence separating Gaza from Israel continue, though in smaller numbers. Israeli defense forces are reported to have used excessive force in attempting to disperse the demonstrators away from the border, resulting in hundreds of gunshot injuries and scores of deaths. The human rights are restricted by Hamas. This is where we come back into Gaza, and other armed groups in the Gazan territory. Palestinians who openly criticize Hamas may be arrested and detained, and torture is reported to be common. Sources also explain that humanitarian situation is worsening due to the ongoing Israel blockade, which is Israel controlling the Gaza border, and the internal Hamas and Palestinian Authority conflict, although there are multiple organizations working to alleviate the difficult conditions. Now, let's look at the exit points and the entry permits that we are required to have when we are in the West Bank. So it says, paragraph 1.2.2, Palestinians from the West Bank can only leave Palestine via Jordan. They must travel into Jordan and then fly from there. Israel polices the West Bank border crossing, and sometimes people arrive at the border and discover that there is a security block against them, and so they cannot travel. If someone is deemed a security risk, and there could be a block logged against them. This goes on to explain what it means by security risk as claimed by those at the border. Then we continue to look at even paragraph 1.2.3, many people who are even remotely linked to someone who's even not actually a member of anyone, but just seemed worrying to the Israeli security force. That was enough for a ban to be on your own name. So then it goes on, paragraph 1.3.1, Area C, we are still in the West Bank, could be seen as an open-air prison. There are no tanks in every corner, but it's roughly the same type of situation. Palestinians in Area C are trapped between the concrete wall and the separation barrier on one side and the Jordanian border, which is also strictly controlled by Israel, and walls on the other side. In the middle of Area C, there are checkpoints and restrictions on movement between Palestinian-controlled environments. So we're in the West Bank Area C right now, where there are checkpoints, and there are lots of small islands of people, from either a few dozens to large cities. On leaving these Palestinian areas, roads are controlled by Israeli authorities. So it goes on. So the paragraph 1.3.2, the diplomatic source also noted that not all roads in the territory can be used by Palestinians, and a permit is needed to travel. And that's only because you're Palestinian, you need a permit to travel. Let's continue. So paragraph 1.3.4, the diplomatic source also noted movement in Area C of the West Bank, that sometimes road layouts are changed by the Israeli authorities. Sometimes Palestinians find themselves at a dead end where an old road comes to an abrupt stop and can no longer be used to travel. Sometimes Israel builds roads which practically can be used by Israelis only. And then paragraph 1.3.5, source 2 observed access to movement is random. For example, a man killed an Israeli soldier and the whole area went into lockdown. No one could get in or out of the area. Many people do not like or prefer not to travel. There are Palestinians who were born and brought up in the West Bank but have never gone to the other side of West Bank because they do not want to travel. Why they don't want to travel? Because paragraph 1.3.6, Human Rights Organization notes the Palestinians from West Bank could easily find work in Jerusalem, which is only 10 minutes away from Bethlehem, but they cannot enter the area. Why is that? Let's continue. Because paragraph 1.3.7, the only way for a Palestinian from the West Bank to enter Jerusalem is by using a magnetic card and a valid military permit, which is granted and revoked at a total discretion of the military army. Right, and then even say you have the permit, Palestinians can only use checkpoints, for example 300 if they are from Bethlehem. If a permit holder from Bethlehem attempts to use another checkpoint, they would be stopped and made to go back. Paragraph 1.3.8, the ICHR representative noted relative limits of freedom movement between Gaza and West Bank. And then we have the checkpoints here, paragraph 1.4.2. This is when you have a permit to travel. As you're traveling, you come across checkpoints. The process of going through a checkpoint is humiliating and dangerous. Soldiers do not care about, there are soldiers at the checkpoints. Soldiers do not care about people's special circumstances. A contact of the organization also states that she tried to cross a checkpoint whilst pregnant. The metal detector beeped as she went through, but she did not know why, so she continued to walk through. Israeli soldiers began shouting at her in Hebrew, but she didn't understand what they were saying. Within a second, 5 soldiers were pointing a gun at her. And that continues, and then It says here, many Palestinians travel to Ramallah for work, which can be a huge impediment. It can take 2 to 3 hours in the morning and evening, depending on where you travel from. The Israeli military can decide to set up flying checkpoints anywhere where they randomly close roads. Closures are of the road closures are collective punishment. Following an attack on Israeli settlement, the authorities close access to certain roads when there is an alleged attack in Israel. They shut checkpoints down, meaning nobody can move in the area. So it looks like collective punishment isn't a new concept for the Israeli military. And then let's continue. Each entry and exit to Palestinian cities are controlled by Israeli checkpoints. So earlier when we found that Gaza was de facto controlled by Hamas, well, that may be practically internally of management, but if there are checkpoints and border controls, then there's a huge restriction and huge power on Israel of what goes in and what goes out. We'll see in a minute what that practically looks like. Let's continue here. And each entry and exit to Palestinian cities are controlled by Israeli checkpoints. For example, travel from Bethlehem to Ramallah, people must pass through 2 checkpoints, one to leave Bethlehem and the another to enter Ramallah. Sometimes Palestinians can wait for 5 hours to pass through. The checkpoints are open and closed under Israeli discretion. There are many daily violations which are systematic to disrupt daily life or freedom of movement of the Palestinian people. Checkpoints only affect Palestinians, not Jewish settlers or Israelis. Israeli or Jewish settlers drive yellow plate cars and Palestinians drive white plate cars. The drivers of yellow plate cars, Israeli and Jewish settlers, can enter and exit anywhere. Drivers of white plate cars, Palestinians, have to go through checkpoints and cannot use all roads. And some roads are only for the yellow plate cars, meaning Palestinians must take longer or alternative roads to get from place A to place B. Let's continue. We want to look at, so evidently we've seen what it's like in West Bank and how there are checkpoints because you're a Palestinian and you have to get permits to do things. I want to just look at, there are arrests and detentions, yes. I want to look at Gaza because I want to see how that was 47. Gaza. So paragraph 4.1.2, people do not have life opportunities in general. Gaza is densely populated, and it goes on to explain the freedom of movement. So paragraph 4.2.1, the Palestinian Authority, Ministry of Interior representative noted the Palestinian people have no contact with the outside world except via the ports of crossings controlled by Israel. I want to continue and show you what that looks like. So exit and entry permits for people in Gaza. 4.3.1, documents needed to enter and exit Gaza depend on the person. A resident of Gaza wishes to exit through Israel needs approval from Hamas, as well as exit permit from Israel. Even if a Palestinian from Gaza wants to transit through Israel and the West Bank to go to Jordan, it can be incredibly difficult to get that permit. Regarding trader permits, it tells us that if you want to do business, you need a permit and how likely it's going to be forthcoming. The likelihood is very low, and it gives us the numbers that business is very difficult to do. Paragraph 4.3.7, it tells us out of how many millions of people live there compared to how many permits that have been granted even. And then these are the different crossings and the armed groups in Gaza, and how, because we earlier came across the Great March of Return, paragraph 4.12.1, it explains how the military used force, excessive force, against the protesters, and that is their normal strategy, to use excessive force. Let's look at paragraph just above paragraph 4.12.5. Above that, the paragraph starts with the vast majority of Palestinians killed in protest who are not posing a risk not level of risk to those guarding the fence that would warrant the use of lethal force. Even though then the lethal force was used. 4.12.8, Israel has expansive open fire policy and regularly use excessive force. And then so far we've come across how Palestinian civilians living in West Bank or East Jerusalem or Gaza are restricted severely by Israel's military, Israel's administrative government, and now in Gaza they're controlled by Israel because Israel controls the border of what goes in and out, but also Hamas. Paragraph 4.13.1, if you want to criticize Hamas, the governing body of Gaza, you cannot openly criticize it, it's very dangerous. And then it tells us how Hamas deals with people who criticize and protest, and how Hamas exerts control, whether it be by ill treatment or torture. I just want to finalize the point with what it means when Israel controls the border and they say, oh, Hamas is the one governing Gaza. Living conditions in Gaza. So here we see what it's like to live. It's paragraph 4.23.3. Gaza is already uninhabitable. Stated that it believes the situation in Gaza today already fits the description of uninhabitable. What does that mean? Healthcare, is poor healthcare. We will come across. So we'll look at paragraph 4.20, where access to food and water. It confirms that paragraph 4.20.5, statistics show there is virtually no water pumped from the aquifer. Gaza's authorities buy water from Israel, and clean water access is based on financial ability. The water in Gaza is just so bad that people have to filter it or buy filtered water. Children's health is deteriorating due to consuming poor water. The WHO reports the degree of deterioration of children's health due to consuming this type of water. And then we look at 4.20.6. In Gaza, there is 0% clean water, as stated by CHR. People have to buy bottled water. The tap water is not clean, cannot be used for cooking or cleaning. There is also a huge problem with electricity. Gazans have access to 8 hours of electricity a day. And this is after international intervention, where Qatar has paid money to help. Electricity previously used to be 2 to 4 hours a day, and now it's 8. And then 4.20.7, even if you want to fish in the Gazan coast, you can't, because the water's contaminated, and there are fishing restrictions placed on by Israel. I also want to see living conditions in Gaza as we continue. It says paragraph 4.23.2, a representative added Gaza is very densely populated, and the living conditions are unlivable due to lack of water. And then it goes on to say, paragraph 4.23.5, the way that the living space is used is often crowded, and it's the same in the West Bank, but not as dramatic. And then they describe the camps, although no walls or fences. And then paragraph 4.23.7, the same source noted there is need for electricity for desalination plants to work. Electricity comes from and is controlled by Israel. The international community are trying to arrange an agreement between Israel and Hamas to provide the people of Gaza power every day. The electricity cuts affect hospitals, schools, etc. It goes on. Paragraph 4.23.8, the diplomatic source organizations trying to make quick fixes, trying to find ways every week to alleviate pressure to make life a bit more livable. If the Israeli side are not more flexible in allowing Palestinians to enter and exit Gaza for work, or to allow more food to enter, Gaza will become worse and it will not be possible to live there. The UN report stated that Gaza will be unsustainable in 2020, and no one knows exactly what this will mean for the 2 million people who live there. This is in 2020, so now I hope this policy and going through it has helped you to understand objectively from a legal perspective what it means for the conditions of civilians living in the Palestinian occupied territories. As always, contact me details below, subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Take care.